Okay, in this video we're going to talk about something very important, which is validating items. And we're using something called the WhenValidateItem trigger. And now I've brought up my screen that I use in most of my demonstrations, which is a screen. In this case, I'm working with the dept and the emp table again. Let me bring up my SQL Plus. I have an employee table, which is emp, and it has an emp no, an emp name, and a department name. And then I have a dept table, which has the dept number and the department name. So in this form, I've got a block which is based on the employee table. And when I key in a department number, what I want to do is I want to make sure that that department is a valid department by querying the dept table. And then I want to put the dept name in this non-base table display field. Now, if you watch the LOV tutorial, you'll see that what we did before is we clicked on a mouse here and brought up a list of departments to make sure that you were selecting the department number from a list. But in this case, I'm one of those users who wants to just do heads down typing, and I've memorized all my department numbers, so I want to just go to the department number field and type in the department number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the layout editor, I'm going to right click on the department, and I'm going to go to Smart Triggers. And so the trigger that I'm going to create is the WhenValidateItem trigger. So I click WhenValidateItem, and it brings up my PL SQL editor. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the PL SQL that is going to fire whenever the WhenValidateItem trigger fires. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to begin my block. So as in PL SQL, it's always got a begin and an end. So I've got my begin and my end. Now what am I going to do inside of my begin and my end? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say select dept name into. Now when I reference a field on the form, I begin it with a colon. I'm going to say b.emp, which is the block, dot dept nbt, which I use, is a naming convention I use called non-base table, dept name from dept where dept no equals, and now I'm referencing another field on the form, which is b.emp dot dept no. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to select department name into this field here from dept where dept no equals this field here. But now what happens when there is no department? Well, I need to create an error. So I do that in the exception handler. So I go exception, and then in this case it's when no data found. So when no data found, then the first thing I want to do is put a message. So I'm going to say message invalid department. Okay, and now I want the form to stop. I don't want it to keep going. I don't want to let you get past this field if you've got an invalid department. So then what I do is I go raise form trigger failure, which is a built into Oracle, and what that'll do is that will just stop you in your tracks. So now I've got that done. I'm going to compile it. It compiled fine. So let's save my project and run it. And here we go. So I'm going to say program, run form. Okay, now my form has appeared. Now what's going to happen is when I get to this field here, I'm going to say I'm going to add employee 5 self. Now I want to add department. Let's say I'm going to put in department 30, which doesn't exist. Okay, I get the message because we raised the form trigger failure down here, invalid department. That was the message. So that worked the way it was supposed to. If I put in department 1, now it brings up sales. Now if I go back and I look at this list of values, you'll see what I had here. I had sales, marketing, and construction. So if I go here and I enter anything but those, I'm going to get that message. And if I enter something that does exist, so I think department 2 was marketing and department 4 was construction. But if I enter department 5, which doesn't exist, you notice I get down at the bottom, I get stuck in the field and I get an invalid department field. Now that's the WhenValidateItem trigger, but now I want to show you something because this is going to lead us to the next situation, which is I'm going to save this record, but now I'm going to enter my query. I'm going to go enter query and then execute query. Now you notice in this case it brought up the 3 employees that I've entered through these tutorials, but it hasn't brought the name here because the when validate item trigger does not fire at the end of the query. So what you're going to need to do is the same validation that you do on the when validate item trigger, you also need to do in the post query trigger. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a lot of the different triggers in a lot of different videos, but just to show you that the when validate item trigger and all the other triggers, you need to be very conscious of when the triggers fire, because in this case, well, I really want my department names displayed, but it isn't the when validate item trigger that I'm going to use in order to display those items in this case.